What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. The time is now. We are going to figure out exactly where the heck to put your Brewmaster monk in terms of covenant placement. And this is always a fun time for us in terms of how we go about doing these videos, because we get to talk about every single one of these covenant abilities. And if you have not watched these videos in the past, ultimately I am focusing on just a small number of things in terms of how we're going to go about picking our covenant from a tanking perspective. So let's start there, and let's start with our grading criteria. So first, this is a spec specific video. I am focusing purely on Brewmaster and Brewmaster only. If you're looking for an overview on monk as a whole, I'll touch on it a little bit, but for the most part, this is strictly with an eye on Brewmaster. Number 2, this is likely going to only project as far as the early stages of the X-Pack. These covenant abilities and their buffs and their bonuses are likely going to change based on your gear level. So, you know, there may not even be a wrong answer at this point in time. Everyone's just kind of stressing out over what the first raid tier looks like, and I'm making my projections really just based on the early stages of what the X-Pack is shaking out to look like. Number 3, I am choosing my covenant based on the ability that I get from it. And what I want that ability to do is allow me to do more than one type of content. And if I focus my time primarily on Torghast, on raids, and on Mythic Plus content, then I want my covenant ability to make me feel enabled and in a very good place to do content across all of those pieces of content that I outlined. Now, my last set of criteria is that I am excluding the conduit system from the overall evaluation of these skills. A couple of reasons for that, but the primary reason, the one worth calling out, is that ultimately we're not going to see tons of sweeping changes to all the class abilities as they exist today. There's going to be a couple of, exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, Blizzard is actively working on the feedback with the community, or so they say, and they're tweaking and tuning down ability strength, but most of those tweaks and tunings are coming through the conduit system. And so it would be unfair to say that, hey, if you go this covenant and you go with this ability, it's going to be this strong because you have to pair it with these conduits. There's just too much in terms of variables there that I'm just not going to touch. So I'm literally just going to be focusing on the ability in terms of how it feels and does it add to my overall gameplay, the overall strength of the ability itself as a baseline, not plus a conduit, and the viability, as I mentioned in bullet point 3 here. All right, let's go ahead and jump into it. We're clear on our criteria. So if you have not seen my videos before, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rank from the bottom all the way up, number 4 through number 1, in terms of where you should park your Brewmaster monk based on their covenant abilities. And I'm going to start this one off maybe a bit controversial, but I'm going to go number 4, Night Fae. A couple of reasons why this one lands at the bottom for me. When you join a covenant, you get 2 abilities. You get the signature ability, in this case Soul Shape, and you get the class ability, which is Phalanx Stomp. And to just kind of put some reasoning behind this, I feel as though Soul Shape is just a wasted covenant ability for a monk. With all of the movement skills, chi torpedo, roll, whatever you're using, and the fact that monk in general is just a fairly mobile class, a highly mobile class, I should say, you're just not going to find an opportunity where Soul Shape is going to be all that valuable overall, given the fact that you have legendaries that can potentially add an extra charge to your roll. If you're going to go with something like that, what's the point of Soul Shape? So to me, the signature ability is not a good one to start with, and that puts me in a bad spot overall, because if I'm not getting some value out of signature, then the class ability has to be so damn good that I'm all over it. And when I look at what Phalanx Stomp does, they did just increase the damage, so it's worth calling that out, is that in the current form of beta, it's doing a little bit more damage overall, but as a Brewmaster, all you're doing is igniting your enemies with Breath of Fire. If you're playing a Brewmaster and you're playing a Brewmaster well, then you have literally very little conflict in keeping up your Breath of Fire on your targets. It is very difficult to let that fall off. For the most part, you're going to be able to maintain uptime on it, and there's really no opportunity where Phalanx Stomp casting that is going to feel good, because you're already actively getting the mitigation that comes with Breath of Fire without it being passively cast for Phalanx Stomp. So unless Blizzard drastically changes this and gives you, I don't know, 10% damage reduction or something if you stand on Phalanx Stomp, I just don't see how this is going to be better than number 4 from a Covenant perspective for a Brewmaster, if that's your primary spec. At number 3, we've got Ventier. And again, I'm really getting stuck on the fact that Door of Shadows and Soul Shape, they're essentially the same thing. Soul Shape's better because it's an insta-cast, but when I look at my Covenant signature ability, I have to say, oh my gosh, that class Covenant ability is so good. I have to go ahead and jump in and get that. I don't care if the signature ability is just complete crap, right? And that's not the case. It is not the case. Unfortunately, Ventier, as cool as you may think Ventier is, it's just not giving you what you need from a tank perspective. And let me go ahead and explain what this gives you. If you join Ventier, you get Fallen Order. Fallen Order is a 24-second portal that you can cast where your fallen monk adepts will rise from the dead every 2 seconds, and it will essentially summon either a Fallen Ox, which is your Fallen Brewmaster, a Fallen Crane Adept, which is your Mistweaver, or your Fallen Tiger Adept, which is your Windwalker. And they're up and they're active for a total of 6 seconds apiece. Now, since you're playing Brewmaster, you're watching this video, you're playing Brewmaster, this is going to summon a few extra Fallen Ox Adepts instead of either the Mistweaver or the Windwalker. And as of right now, those are actually lasting for an additional 2 seconds. So your uptime on the Ox is going to be higher. Again, the same problem that existed with Night Fae exists here with Ventier, in that they're popping up and your Oxes are casting Breath of Fire. The same Breath of Fire you already have up. So it might help in terms of keeping it refreshed. It might help in terms of just, making sure that Breath of Fire is always ticking. It gives you damn near that 100% uptime that you're looking for. But I would almost prefer to have the adepts that you're not necessarily attuned with, like your Crane or your Tiger, to actually have the higher uptime. Only because as a Brewmaster, I already got Breath of Fire on lockdown. I don't need any additional help. I would love it if those Cranes could stick around and maybe heal me a little bit more and add a little bit more utility. But that's the only reason why Fallen Order is eking out ahead of Phalanx Stomp right now, is simply because it does come with a bit of healing utility. It does come with some extra damage with your Tiger Adepts. Otherwise, they're pretty darn close in terms of just the playstyle. The difference is, and this is the other reason why, I kind of flirted between putting Ventier last and Night Fae at number 3. This is a longer cooldown. It's currently a 3-minute cooldown, so you can only cast Fallen Order once every 3 minutes. So now you've taken an ability that should feel more liberal in terms of how often you're casting it, and you're making it and you're turning it into a significant cooldown. A 3-minute cooldown is generally pretty significant, and because of that, you feel like you can't necessarily waste it on trash packs unless you're doing a Mythic Plus and there's a specific trash pack that is really giving your group a ton of problems, and you're okay with not necessarily having that up for a boss. So that's something to keep in mind, is that it does not necessarily translate all that well in terms of the amount of button pushes that you get. If Blizzard made this a bit more rotational, there's a good chance that Fallen Order could leapfrog Phalanx Stomp in short order. So we'll have to see what changes they make to the beta over the last month here or so. Okay, a bit more controversy here, because at number 2, I have Kyrian currently. And a few reasons for this. First of all, Blizzard just nerfed the buff that you're getting in terms of the percentage for the class as a whole. So this is why this is a little bit more controversial, because you may have been thinking, hey, my Brewmaster probably belongs in Kyrian. The mastery buff is going to be really good across all of my specs, and therefore I feel as though Kyrian is going to be the best fit. However, they did just nerf the mastery buff across the Windwalker spec. I'm sure they're looking at it for potentially some of the others. We'll have to wait and see. But overall, just to kind of explain what you're getting if you join Kyrian, first, you're going to go ahead and get your Summon Steward ability. And again, I always ask myself, what is this signature ability giving me that I don't currently have in my toolkit? Because that's what I want to make up for. And what I will say is it is nice to be able to have a potion that cleanses all poison, all bleed effects, you name it, right? It's really nice to be able to have that in your toolkit, but you're already able to purify a good chunk of that stuff already. So if you're someone that really likes the added utility, or potentially, you know, if you're progressing pretty hard and you feel like you need that in your toolkit because you need to be able to help out your healers, that is a justification you can absolutely make. But the main reason why Weapons of Order comes in at number 2 for me and does not land at the top is because it's not necessarily the most fun ability to play. It's something that you just kind of push pretty much on cooldown. You're obviously going to want to time it more so around bosses so that you have it. But when I look at, you know, the repercussions of pushing it versus not pushing it, it's only at a 2-minute cooldown, so it doesn't feel too bad. Mastery is always a good thing. It's got 30% or a 30-second uptime, which translates into a 25% uptime versus the minute and a half that it's going to be on cooldown. But it doesn't do anything that enhances or changes the way that you play the game. It's literally just a flatline buff. And if you're okay with that, and you're okay with a relatively boring ability that you don't necessarily have to plan for, you can just focus on doing your rotation, making sure you keep your stagger up, by all means, go right ahead. There's nothing wrong with Kyrian. It's just rather boring. And in its current state, and Blizzard is obviously tweaking with this, given that they just announced some changes to Weapons of Order for Windwalker, you know, we could see that Brewmaster's not far behind. If anything, I think we could be dealing with some kind of a buff for Brewmaster. I was relatively unimpressed with the buff that it gave me, but that may also have to do with the fact that they probably still need to do a little bit of tweaking to Celestial Brew as well. We'll see. We'll see. Ultimately, Weapons of Order is just something that if you're going to give me just a flat-out buff, I would rather have that in the form of, I don't know, just another talent in my talent tree, or I don't know. From a Covenant perspective, when you're talking about an identity with your Covenant, this is flat-out one of the most boring Covenant abilities that I think they have given just about any of the tank classes to this point in time. So that's where I'll stop. Kyrian comes in at number 2 for me. So that means that we have the Necrolords coming in at number 1 for the Brewmaster. And this is why I said this could be a little bit controversial, because when you look at, you know, the spec Brewmaster, this could make perfect sense to you. But if you look at the class of Monk, this is where you might be saying, I'm not so sure about this one because I mistweave on my off time, and I'm not all that sure about, you know, the viability of what Bone Dust Brew is going to look like, or I'm not sure that Fleshcraft gives me exactly what I need, and I would much prefer to be able to cleanse myself with the Kyrian Covenant. Perfectly fine, understandable, but as I evaluate each of these abilities, I am doing it strictly through the Brewmaster lens. So let's talk a little bit about this. If you are going with the Necrolords and you're currently playing Brewmaster, or really any class for that matter, you're going to get the signature ability Fleshcraft. Fleshcraft is really a nice little spell. It's on a 2-minute cooldown. I wish it was, you know, off cooldown a little bit faster than that, but it's a 2-minute cooldown spell where if you channel this ability for the full duration, you are going to, at a minimum, get a baseline shield of 20% of your base health pool. If you channel this ability after you've beaten up a tough pack of mobs, or after you've beaten a boss or an elite mob, you have a chance to bring that shield on up between 20 and 50%. So your max is going to be 50%, so you could be walking into a boss fight or walking into a sizable trash pack with 150% of your baseline health. That's definitely a good thing. What I will say, and it's worth pointing out, Brewmasters certainly have the lowest health pool of any of the tanks out there, and so that might be something that influences your decision there. Either way, I'd say 50% is 50%. Doesn't matter if Brewmasters have a lower health pool, and therefore it gives you a lower total shield. The fact is that you're dealing with 50% of what your baseline health is anyway. So 50% is 50%. Between 20 and 50%, it's actually a really nice thing to have, and it's a very high utility for a tank. It's obviously going to be very situational because you're going to get more bang for your buck probably in a dungeon setting than you would a raid, but that's we'll have to wait and see exactly how that pans out. Now, as far as the class ability, Bone Dust Brew, I really like the way Blizzard worked this. And just to kind of give a very quick overview, Bone Dust Brew is yet another brew that you can add to your collection. So you've got now your Celestial Brew, you've got your Purifying Brew, and now Bone Dust Brew. And the reason why I'm only mentioning those three and not Fortified is because they all interact very well with Keg Smash and Tiger Palm, in that Keg Smash and Tiger Palm will actually reduce the cooldown of all three of those brews. And that's something that is super cool. It's the only Covenant ability that they actually made for Monk that works with the brew system today. So given the fact that there's a slate of changes for Brewmaster, and you no longer have to actively manage your stagger and keep that stagger up between 7 and 21 seconds, it's something that's just done rotationally. The fact that you need to manage your brews more efficiently is a very good thing. I will say that because Bone Dust Brew is up for 10 seconds and it's on a baseline 1 minute cooldown, the fact that your rotation and getting your haste to a point where you feel comfortable in getting your rotation done, not only for stagger purposes, but now to keep Bone Dust Brew active as often as possible, is very cool in terms of overall gameplay. And if you don't know what Bone Dust Brew does specifically, it actually makes it so that 35% of the time when you have affected a target with Bone Dust Brew, you will attack the target a second time for 35% effectiveness. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but you've got this Bone Dust Brew that's up for 10 seconds, and over the duration of that 10 seconds, you can push out, if you had 100% uptime and you got very lucky in those 10 seconds, and you're dealing with a 1 second global cooldown, those 10 skills could essentially do 35% more damage over that period of time. Now, you're not going to get that 100%. You're going to get more like a third of that time. So you're doing a little bit more damage over the course of those 10 seconds. But then all of a sudden, as long as you've executed your rotation, you got enough Keg Smashes off, you're able to get Tiger Palm weaved in there okay, your Bone Dust Brew is right back off cooldown, and it's ready to go again. So it fits in very well, and it gives you something that synergizes very well with Celestial Brew and Purifying Brew. Because as long as you're being very liberal with those and you're making sure Celestial Brew is pretty much on cooldown, you're boosting it through your Purifying Brew, Bone Dust Brew is only going to add to the overall effectiveness, and you're going to want to make sure that all of them are on cooldown as often as possible. So just something to keep in mind there. But again, a very, very cool thing that Blizzard did by adding a Covenant ability that really feels good for Brewmasters because it works so well with those brew systems. And the fact that they took away the management of stagger gives you now something to look forward to in terms of managing, if that's something that you liked before. But there you go. So there's Covenants 1 through 4 or 4 through 1, depending on how you look at it. I'd love to know your feedback below.